Hello and welcome to Bachelor Cooking. My name is Mad Cat and I'll be your chef today. Now this series is directed mostly at men, although I do encourage women to watch these series of videos. In my experience, I've met a number of bachelors that live alone, or they live with a roommate or a girlfriend, and they don't know how to cook. The most amount of cooking they do is ramen noodles, and most of their meals consist of fast food. Now I think it's important that everyone learns to cook, not just women. To me, cooking is an art form and one that I take a lot of pride in, and this video series is going to help men who don't know how to cook, how to do a couple of simple dishes so that A, they can eat healthier, and B, they can also impress women. Now, nothing impresses women more than big burly muscles and a six-pack. But as you can see, I'm lacking that. So the second fastest way to impress a woman and to get her running into your bed is being able to cook. Now today we're going to be doing spaghetti. Now the first key important thing that I want to note is that, I don't know if you can see this, but this is linguine. Now you'll be asking, why am I cooking linguine and not spaghetti? Or the more important question, why am I saying I'm cooking spaghetti when in fact I'm cooking linguine? Well, for most of the population in America, if you say to someone, hey, you want some linguine? They'll stare at you blankly or think that you've insulted them in some way and probably punch your lights out. But if I say, hey, do you want some spaghetti? They're like, oh yeah, man, I love spaghetti. Ah, God, I love it. Now, the reason I'm using linguine and not spaghetti is because I find spaghetti a little too thin for my tastes. Now, you're welcome to use spaghetti if you want. You can even use angel hair pasta. Actually, you can also use elbow macaroni, bow tie macaroni, any kind of shells you want. This will work for all of that. So, I personally like linguine because it's a little bit thicker and it has a lot more heft to it when I'm eating it. Alright, so the first thing we'll need to do is to go ahead and get the pot of water started. Now, go ahead and follow me over here. Now, as you can see, we've got a variety of pans here. We'll be making use of a lot of these pans. But we're actually going to grab this big pan here. So, we're going to grab this, and then I'm going to fill this up with water. Okay, so we went ahead and put our pot on. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this on the big burner. I'm going to put this at the second to highest notch, which on my stove is an 8. Now we're going to, if I had it, I would actually use chicken broth here. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't want my pasta to taste like chicken. Why would you put chicken broth in here? Well, one thing that you're going to find out on this show is that we're going to be doing a lot of different things that might seem strange, but it's to enhance the flavor through a chemical reaction. Now in this case, I want this pot of water to have salt in it, but I don't want to over salt it. And one of the best ways to do that is to put chicken broth. Now, I'd only put a small amount of chicken broth in there, but as so long as you get a high sodium one, because a low sodium would defeat the purpose, it'll spread salt through this and lightly salt it. However, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use garlic salt. And the reason why, one, because I do want to get the salt in there. That should be enough. I do want to get the salt in there, but I don't want it necessarily to taste like garlic. So why am I doing that? Well, it's not going to have a lasting effect of garlic. That's actually going to be dissipated very fast. However, and you can actually smell this a little bit. Well, you can't, I can. I can smell this garlic. As this boils, I mean, this is going to take about anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to come to a boil. As it boils, you know, air bubbles comes from the bottom of the pan and surfaces and releases oxygen. Well, while it does that, it also releases the garlic in the air. And I can be all the way in my room and I'm going to smell the garlic. Now, at first, when I smell it, it's going to be a little bit kind of like in the back of my mind, from my subconscious. I'm suddenly thinking, I want some garlic bread. You're not even consciously aware you're thinking this. It's just suddenly you have a craving for something with garlic in it. And that's an indication that this is ready to be checked on. Most likely it's at a boiling point. If you don't notice it then, and it takes a little bit of practice to notice it at that time, because again, it's your subconscious mind, you'll definitely start smelling it a little bit of time after that, and that's a real good indication this is at a boiling point. It's a little trick I developed. I'm sure someone else has developed this trick, but it's a trick that I like to use. Alright, so while I wait for this, and this is going to take a little bit of time to do, we're not going to sit here and wait for that the whole time. I'm going to talk to you about some of the ingredients. One of the key ingredients to my pasta is ground beef. Now, this is not a requirement, especially for you vegetarians out there. You can go ahead and skip this bit of information. Anything related to the meat in this video today, just go ahead and ignore it. You should still be able to get a good creation. But for me, ground beef is really important. I love ground beef. But the one key thing that you need to know about ground beef is this right here. Got these numbers. 2 sets, one for lean and one for fat. 80-20. So what do these numbers mean? What can we learn from this? Well, this indicates how lean the meat is. 80% means that it's meat, 20% means it's fat. So what we can gather from this is, in my opinion, it's taste. Now, you have a couple different numbers to deal with. First, you've got 73% lean, 27% fat. That's about the lowest I've ever seen. You really don't want to go any lower than that. Then you get the 80-20 and then 90-10. It can go higher than that. But what do these numbers really represent? Well, it represents the fat in it, but it's like, well, why would you want more fat versus less fat? What's really going on here? Well, what's really going on here is basically what type of meat it is. I mean, it says ground beef, but these percentages represent different parts of the cow. Now, 73% all the way up to about 84% represent what we call ground chuck, or just chuck. Now you'll see the little display here of where a part of the cow it is, but you'll see that it's really on the shoulder there. Now this area is really worked on the cow because it's using it to move its feet. so it has a lot more fat, but to me, it's a lot more tastier of the cow. So it's also the least expensive. As you can see, there's a lot of it, and I think it's ideal for tacos. It's very tasty and juicy. The next we have 85 to 89% lean, which is about 11 to 15% fat. Now, this is ground round meat. And as you can see from the diagram, this is the rear cut, or the ass. Now, this is a good balance of meat and fat, and it's still a very good choice for meat. It has enough fat in it for it to be moist, but it has a lot less fat than chuck. It's often a preferred use for hamburgers because it has enough fat in it for the meat to be juicy. It can also be good for meatloaf or any other number of dishes. Now, the one that's higher than that is about 90 to 95% lean, usually about 5 to 10% fat. This is actually sirloin, and as you can see, it's right near the round. Now, I'm not a big fan of sirloin. I can get it at restaurants, and I mean, if you cook it just right, it can come out well with the right spices. The thing about this is when it's cooked, it doesn't really require it to be drained, but it can also be pretty dry. Now, a way to counteract the dryness is to cook it with like onions and other vegetables to get the juices from that into the meat so it's a little bit more moist. But what meat should you choose? Now, my opinion is that if you're watching this, it means that you're not getting enough things in your diet, such as fat. Now, we live in a very health-conscious society where we want to eat the healthiest things possible, except we still have this affinity for bacon. Don't ask me. Me personally, I go for the 70 to 84%, which is going to be chuck. But that has the most amount of fat. Well, a couple things to remember here. One, if you're eating maybe one meal a day like me, 1 to 2 meals a day, I mean, I'm trying to eat like 5 meals a day, but most of the time I get away with maybe 2 meals a day. I'm not getting the necessary stuff for my nutrition. It's not like we're eating the fat. The fat will drip off the meat as we cook. So long as we drain it, we should be fine. However, the residue of fat on it will still be more than if we did the round or the sirloin. Me, I think that you should go with the fattier meat, but the biggest reason is because it's going to taste better. It's going to be juicier, it's going to be more chewy, in my opinion, and it's going to taste better. And that's why we want to go for the fattier meats. So this is an onion. Now, there are basically 3 types of onions that you'll find in the supermarket. There's a wider variety of onions than that, but for the most part, you're only going to see 3 types: yellow, white, and red, although it looks a little more purple than red. Now, the basic differences between the 3 onions is how they taste and what's their best uses. Yellow is your most versatile onion. It does have a sweet taste when caramelized, which we will be doing here today. And this is about a perfect size for about 1 pound of beef. Now, they come in 2 sizes, small and large. This is a small size, although I would consider it medium, but they can come smaller than this and come larger than this. So we're now actually getting to a boil, so before I cut this onion up, I'm actually going to do the linguine. Now, a lot of people will just throw the linguine in there. Me, I prefer to cut it up. Now, for about 1 pound of ground beef, I'd say about half this box is what your ideal amount's going to be. So let's go ahead and take a portion here. Now sometimes you get some smaller fragments that come out. Just crack it and throw it in. Now it might seem like they're short, but trust me, those seem pretty long when you pull them out. So that's not exactly half yet, so let me go ahead and pull out a couple more strands. You know, they say that when you try to break a noodle in half, like spaghetti or even linguine, it always comes out more than 2 pieces, usually 3 or 4. That came out to about 6. Should try it sometime. That's about half, so we'll go ahead and leave that there. Now one thing I am going to do is I'm going to put canola oil in. Not very much. I'm actually going to turn this down to about 6. It's not going to take too much longer for this to cook. I'd say maybe about a couple tablespoons, maybe 1/3 of a cup. Now what this is going to do is, as it cooks through, it's actually going to separate the noodles. 1, they don't stick to each other, and 2, they don't stick to the bottom of the pan. In future episode, I'll discuss oils a little bit more. I don't have too much time to be explaining things right now. So let's go ahead and cut up this onion. So fairly simple. Now, if you didn't want to use the whole onion, just cut it in half and put this side in the refrigerator. It's going to last longer. Means I'm going to use the full thing. Now you'll notice that my hands shake. It's not because I'm nervous, it's just a condition I have, something I've learned to live with. The first thing we need to do is get the outside layer. Mostly it's just to get the skin off. Most of the time the onion will be pretty easy to do for this. This one's just being a little bit difficult. There we go. Alright, so best way to cut up the onion is like this. First, cut it up into sections. Then we cut in the middle, cut in the middle, cut in the middle. And then I cut as little pieces as possible. Now you'll notice that I'm turning the knife a little bit, so I want to separate them away from this as much as possible. Now the pieces might still look a little bit large, but as they cook, they're going to get smaller. I'm actually going to put this here on 6. I'm going to let them cook a little bit. I'm going to stir this, kind of separate them. Be sure to keep stirring this because even though I put the oil in here so it doesn't stick together, that doesn't really stop it, it just kind of helps prevent it from happening. So now we're going to get this ready to cook. Now while I'm waiting for this to kind of heat up, and you're going to hear this when it's ready. I'll tell you when the time is ready. let me go ahead and discuss seasoning a little bit. Now, in a later episode, I'll go into a lot more about seasoning and go to the pyramid, the spice pyramid a little bit. And just my theory on that. It's not anything official. But there's basically 4 stages to seasoning. Now, there's a pre-seasoning before it ever touches the stove. Now, in this case, I don't need to do that. When we do steaks or bratwurst, I'll show you then how that works. There's, right when it touches the pan, we do a little bit of seasoning. Mostly, especially with ground beef, I want the taste of salt and pepper to be on the inside of the food when I cook it. Then there is the right before I'm done, which we'll be doing here, about 5 minutes or so, I want to put in a lot of my flavors in, which for this I'll be using tarragon, basil, and rosemary. You can start hearing this sizzle. If you can't, you will in a moment. Let me go ahead and stir this up a little bit because I don't want it sticking to the bottom. Now, we want to, when about 5 minutes before this is done, we want to go ahead and season it again. And then when we fuse it together, there will be a seasoning. I kind of consider that part of the 5 minutes before it's done category. I don't really have official names for this. Now, yeah, now you're really hearing it going. Yeah, so now I'm actually going to set this to 2. Still going to cook a little bit. Be sure to stir it again. I want it to start sizzling, but I don't want to cook it right this moment. So now the fun part. Now, if you're anal retentive like me, I recommend getting a paper towel and setting it aside. Because what we do next is we're going to get our hands dirty. Now, men, we love to get our hands dirty, and this is the fun part about cooking. We grab it with our bare hands and start putting it on here. Now, another reason why I'm doing it this way is because I want the ground beef to mostly cook evenly. So I actually have the onions act as a barrier between the pan and the meat. So even though it's going to start cooking the moment it touches the pan, it's not going to be cooking that fast. Yeah, the noodles are almost done, so once I get this started, we'll go ahead and deal with the noodles after that. Now, generally, I'm a little bit further along with the meat, but I was doing a little bit of explanation, so that's why I seem to be rushing a little bit right now. But it's not a problem. So just get this in, separate it. And you can start hearing that sizzling die down a little bit, but it's still sizzling. And because I got the paper towel out before, I can easily now wipe my hands. And I don't have to touch the whole paper towel roll just to get it. So, I'm using salt. You can use whatever salt you want, but I tend to go for kosher salt when I'm cooking. Get a good amount on there. Now don't worry about using too much, because when you're first starting out cooking, you're going to be thinking, oh, well, this is too much, and then it ends up not being enough. Now, I use a pepper grinder, and when you get one of these, which this I think cost me like $30 to get, a little expensive, but well worth the investment, you're actually going to smell it. The pepper, what you're smelling is the oil that's within these. So when you grind it up, it releases the oil and makes it a lot more potent. So let's let that cook a little bit. Now, a lot of people will like to throw their spaghetti, but I'm kind of a weakling when it comes to the heat. I can't just reach my hand in there and pull it out or even really touch it. Now, a technique that you can do is kind of pull some of it out and squeeze it, and if it's very squishy, then it's ready to go. But what I'm doing here, and I recommend stirring it a lot through the various stages to kind of get this feel, but I know this is done just by stirring it because it's the amount of resistance that it's putting up. So I'm actually going to turn this off, and I'm not going to pull it from the heat just yet. I'm going to let it sit there for a moment. It can stand to cook a little bit. Now what I'm going to do, grab a colander. Well, this is sort of like a colander. My other colanders are packed up right now. So I'm basically going to pour the water inside that to separate the noodles, the pasta, from the water, because I don't need the water anymore, plus the oil as well. Let's go ahead and throw this stuff away while I have a few moments. It's starting to brown on the bottom, so that's an indication to me that I kind of need to stir it up a little bit. Now you'll notice that these onions have gotten a little bit smaller. Not so big as I once had them, and they've kind of separated a little bit. So this red color you see in ground beef and a lot of other beef, there's actually a chemical they add to it to make it that color. It's not naturally that color by itself. It's not harmful, and it's a good indicator to tell how fresh the meat is. The more red it is, the more fresh it is. Brown meat's not necessarily means that it's bad, but it's often an indication that you need to cook it sooner rather than later. Generally, when you get meat from the store, the best thing to do is to throw it in the freezer immediately. It retains the red a lot more. So yeah, this is really cooking through. In a few minutes, I'm going to add my seasoning. Right now, I'm going to separate out the water. All right. It's hot. So, we're going to put our tomato sauce in. Wow, this is embarrassing. There we go. Now, you can use regular tomato sauce for this process, but the best way to attract the ladies, for both men and ladies, I mean, I'm sure there's a few bisexual or gay women out there, is we're going to use what we call a base in our sauce. Now, what I'm using is basically a store-bought sauce that's already prepared. I use Classico. I hear that Safeway is actually pretty good. This is tomato and basil. Also good to save the jars, just wash them out later, and you can use them for a variety of things. Now I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to put this at 4. Meat's cooking pretty well. Let's go ahead and stir the meat again. Yeah, this is really starting to look good. It's actually starting to get to a point where almost done. So we're going to do our seasoning now. Now, since this is garlic salt, I prefer garlic powder. This is garlic salt. Since it has a salt component to it, I'm not going to use my kosher salt. If I had garlic powder, I would use garlic powder and the kosher salt. I much prefer the kosher salt. I do want the garlic taste in there though. You just make do with what you have. Kind of make it a little bit snowy on top. Now I'm going to put some rosemary. The thing about rosemary, the best way to do this is to kind of crunch it up in your fingers. Releases some of the oil in it, so it's a little bit more tasty. I also use basil. It's a personal taste for me. As you cook more and more, you're going to figure out what flavors you like. I'm doing this right at the end because if I do it at the beginning, it's going to lose its flavor as it cooks. And we really don't want that. Now this, for the most part, is done. I'm going to turn it off. Now remember, just because I turn it off doesn't mean it stops cooking. God, I love the smell of tarragon. So we're going to let that finish cooking. Sauce is really starting to pick up here. So let's let that sit for a moment. Now the goal on this show is also to try to be as cost effective as possible. And you'll notice that I'm using a small can of tomato sauce. A small one versus a large one. Now 2 of these usually is equal in price to 1 of these. I prefer a small one because this here is 8 ounces, where this one is 15 ounces. 2 of these equals 16 ounces. 1 more ounce, it's a lot more cost effective. Not a big deal, but generally when I'm cooking pasta, 3 of these will do me just fine, especially with my base. Where if I had the 2 big cans, I would have to have extra sauce in order for it to work. And that's just a waste in my opinion. So as you start stirring the spaghetti into the sauce, now a lot of people will cook the sauce separately and then serve the spaghetti in a bowl and put the sauce on top. Me personally, I'd rather have it all intermixed together, because when I do eat it, like the traditional way, I end up mixing it together. So I might as well mix it together now. Now when you start mixing this, you're going to note that the sauce just appears really, really thin. So what I do is I put one of these in. Now you can buy the cheap kind if you want. Me, I go for taste a little bit, splurge a little bit, not too much. But if you do, be wary about if you're buying low sodium and regular. Low sodium, of course, means it has less salt. Now, if you prefer salt in your diet, the only real difference will be that you'll have to add more salt in when you cook. So for right now, I'm going to put 2 of these in here. Now, because I'm adding something extra into here from the original taste, it's going to dilute a little bit of that taste. Yeah, this is pretty saucy right now. So we'll go ahead and let this cook. We'll add some seasoning. I'm going to put in here tarragon. Again, you're going to figure out your spices, but generally garlic, salt, and pepper are going to be your best bet. I'm going to put some pepper in here. Now this is going to really start boiling, so you'll have to keep stirring this until you can get the meat in there. I'm going to put some oregano in here. And then the last thing I'm going to do is some celery salt. We're almost done here. Let us go ahead and take the meat. Now, one thing I'm going to do, because I don't want the fat dripping down the sink, is I'm going to put some paper towels at the bottom of the sink. The reason for this is so that it kind of catches the fat and doesn't go down the drain. Now, you could just put it in the trash can, the paper towels, and then try to dump the colander over. Dump it into the colander over the trash can. The only problem with that is if it hits the side of the bag, it'll cause it to have holes, and when you go to take it out, your bag falls apart. Now, I'm really just shaking this about. You can't see it right now, but I'm shaking it about so I can try to get as much fat off this as I can. Now, it's still going to have a fat residue on it, which I'm perfectly okay with, but certainly we don't need to gorge ourselves. Be sure to get the little bit of onions that's still on this. So now we have fused everything together. Now really stir this in. Don't just do it a little bit and think that it's okay. Really get all of this stuff. I'm sorry that the video got cut short. I was getting ready to finish cooking and then the video just turned off. So I do apologize for that. I won't be too much longer. I know this video has been pretty long. And hopefully my future videos are not going to be as long in this, like this one was, because I'm going to try to use each video to explain a different aspect. So when I do them in future videos, I'll just tell you to go back and look at this video to get that explanation. So I combined the two ingredients, the meat and the pasta together, and then got my dish. Now for me, I would kind of comment that it was a little bit on the salty side, but it was still within my tolerance level, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't put any extra seasoning on it. However, if you do not have a high tolerance for salt, follow my steps and just try to reduce the amount of salt that you're using in there. Now let me go over a quick thing of the cost of this meal. Now the ground beef I got on sale for $1.67. So that was a lucky find right there. So let's just call it even $1.